It's good to be back with you guys. We'll quickly run through what you are doing activity-wise today. The coronavirus update is we are in all sorts of confusion right now because the president during his press conferences has been announcing that he would like to get us back to normal as soon as possible. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to our testing, and this is the thing that you should be aware of as you're watching, our country has two different sets of numbers, and the thing that you need to be thinking about is numbers can tell you different things depending on how you interpret them. President Trump has been telling Americans that we have conducted more coronavirus tests than any other single country, which is true. But based on population, we are testing very few of our Americans based on population. So if you take a look at the number that you see right here, the charts are indicating that compared to other countries, based on tests per million, we aren't testing the same way that Italy, Germany, South Korea has been doing. And so right now, when it comes to coronavirus, our biggest issue that we have is we don't know who has coronavirus, who has been exposed. There's a solid chance that people that you know have been exposed to coronavirus and it acted like a flu or something else with them. Our problem that we have is if we don't know who's had it, and we don't know who has not, and if you are around people who have immune systems that are vulnerable to coronavirus, opening up our society to going back to normal would then expose a lot of people to dangers. I thought I was sharing a screen. I thought I went to presentation mode. Let me go back to here and try this out again. So this should be able to allow you to see the computer that I'm looking at right now. Until we get this number higher, where we can actually like know who has had coronavirus, and in particular, we want to be able to do testing on a regular basis, so that we're not just testing once, but we can test regularly to find out, have you gotten it? Can we get you isolated? Can we do other sorts of things to keep everybody else safe? That's the reason why we're hunkered down right now. And we've been struggling because over the past few weeks, we haven't really seen our testing ability get better for regular everyday individuals like you and I who aren't sick, but we should find out if we've had this before, if we have immunities or whatever. That's what we're kind of waiting on. Right now, though, around the country, there are people who are getting anxious because being out of work is hard and struggling economically is difficult. And so there are a lot of people who'd like to go back to normal. But if we do rush back too quickly, the fear that doctors have is that will then make this situation worse and more people will need health care and whatever. So that's, I wish I had like definitive answers to say, hey, we're coming back on this date. This is how we're progressing. It seems instead that we're having arguments between the president and our governors and other people. And there's a lot of blame being thrown around, but our solutions are kind of slow in coming currently. That being said, though, we know that we're not going to be back in school until May 4th, and then hopefully soon we'll be getting instruction from Governor Walz as far as how things are going. But for us, what you're doing currently is the model that I'll be using to cover content for the next couple weeks. And in particular, I'm piggybacking off of two different things. So your lesson plan today, and I'll flash back to your ongoing Google document. First of all, make sure that you are taking attendance like usual. Most of you guys are doing a great job of that, so make sure that you're good. Remember that I'm going to be collecting your Chapter 25 lessons from you tomorrow. So Chapter 25 Lesson 2 was the assignment for today. And as you can see, as I go back here, and I'm trying to read, but my eyes are not super. So Chapter 25 Lesson 1 was due yesterday. Chapter 25 Lesson 2 is due for today. You're not submitting those right now. You just have that reading done. And then Section 3, I'm going to want you to have tomorrow. I'm going to want to be able to collect your text questions then from you sometime during the course of this weekend. But in particular, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking a look back, first of all, at what you learned about from your video yesterday. And the video was highlighting questions 1 and 3 when it came to the situation going on with segregation. And so for many African Americans, they were hopeful that when it came to segregation, they were hoping that their activities during World War I and World War II, participating in the Great Migration, helping to win the war by entering into the factories as workers, serving in the military would earn them rights. And instead, what happened is after World War I, we had our Red Summer of Hate, where many white workers in the North got mad at African Americans for stealing their jobs. We had lynchings take place. We had a return of the KKK. And sadly, after World War II, we saw racism and segregation happening again, especially with housing. Many white people moved out to the suburbs, like you learned about in the 50s. Many African Americans were prevented from moving out into the suburbs because of housing discrimination. There was actually something called redlining, where they would draw red lines on the maps, and they would say, in these areas, African Americans are not allowed to buy houses. They even went so far as having places like Edina, if you're familiar with that city just south of us, was known as a sundown town, where police officers, if they saw African Americans driving in Edina at night, they would pull African Americans over and they would question them about what they were up to, because they knew for a fact there were no Black people living in Edina because of housing segregation. If you talk to people who are African American nowadays, many of them can tell you stories about getting more attention from police officers strictly because of their skin color. And if you remember the Black Lives Matter movement from a few years ago, that was their emphasis, is that they were getting a lot more attention from the police than white Americans were, strictly because of their race. So we're going to find that with questions 1 and 3, you were studying the NAACP, and the NAACP is an organization that's still around nowadays, created by W.E.B. Du Bois in early 1900s during the Progressive Era. They tried to figure out ways to work through the court system to prove that Plessy versus Ferguson was not being embraced. And in particular, what we want to be noticing is that their actions inside the courts were trying to show to the court system that their argument wasn't working. So in Plessy versus Ferguson, the argument was made that we could have separate but equal facilities for Black and white people. And what they claimed is we could have Black and white drinking fountains, Black and white bus sections, Black and white eating areas. And the argument was that these would be roughly equal, not exactly equal, but roughly equal. And what everybody from the 1890s forward knew is that white Southerners were going to play around with this, and the facilities weren't going to be anywhere close to equal. So the strategy that I had you take note on right here is the NAACP decided to play that game then through the court system, because they realized that there was racism that they were experiencing. So they decided to take at face value the claim of Plessy versus Ferguson. They said, fine, if we are supposed to be separate but equal, they took video cameras, brought them into facilities, and they were able to show in film that the facilities were not equal. When the courts saw this, according to Plessy versus Ferguson, they would then have to rule in favor of African Americans. And the argument would be, you need to, as Southern states, then make your facilities equal. This is going to be a slow process, though, because then what will happen is the NAACP will be watching Southern states, and over a period of months or years, they'll notice, like they could have predicted already, that white Southerners were not going to make facilities equal. They would then document that in footage, go back to court again, and they would prove after the court order previously that the South wasn't changing. And the hope was that going through that slow legal process, you would then be able to force the South to give up on Plessy versus Ferguson, because they, at the beginning and throughout the entire time period, knew that what they were going to create was not separate but equal. It was definitely going to be separate but unequal. And in particular, what I'd like you to notice is it was really hard when you get down to question number 3. It was really hard to maintain segregation in schools when Harry Truman, after World War II, desegregated the military, and when Jackie Robinson is able to desegregate baseball. And during World War II and World War I, when we brought African Americans into our factories, and they did fantastic, because everybody knows that they are genetically the same to white people. There's nothing that is different other than skin color. And as a result, we've got evidence throughout our entire history of African American and white people being equal in capability. And they've demonstrated it now in multiple different places. So when you get to 1957, you had the Brown decision in 1954 that created the diverse classroom that you and I get to enjoy. But in 1957, you're seeing the second element here. So notice what happened in the 1940s and 50s. You had politicians who signed off on the Southern Manifesto, where you have white Southerners who argue that no matter what is done, they will not cooperate with desegregation. They're going to play around with the idea of nullification, which we learned about in first semester, where they're going to argue that with states' rights, they can ignore the federal government and its rules if they don't like what the federal government is wanting to do. And this is the same issue that we fought over in the Civil War. What you're going to be looking at today then is you're going to be taking a look at question 2 and question 4 right here, because we're going to find that during the Eisenhower and the Kennedy presidencies, you're going to have civil rights leaders who are going to be told, look, just be quiet, let's work slowly. And these African-American leaders, civil rights leaders, are going to argue that by being quiet, racism just exists. It's our status quo, and it's not going to be changing. So on top of the NAACP, you're going to see with the Montgomery bus boycott a group called the SCLC. So they should be mentioned somewhere in here. And the two names that you want to be looking for are Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. Now, the old story of the Montgomery bus boycott is Rosa Parks is described as being a woman who was tired after a hard day of work. And what I need to highlight for you is that story is racist in and of itself, because when it comes to Rosa Parks, there's something that is being played around with. It's a term that is used in the South by people who want to behave in a racist sort of way, where African Americans will sometimes be described as being uppity or not knowing their place if they're being disruptive or they're doing other things to protest. So the story of Rosa Parks, when they say that she was tired and she didn't want to give up her seat in the front of the bus, that's trying to make her look like she's just being difficult. In reality, Rosa Parks is somebody who is important because they wanted to choose a woman, first of all, because in our society, women are seen as people who are supposed to be put onto a pedestal. They're supposed to be taken care of. They're supposed to be revered. And if you take a look at African-American men, there are all sorts of studies that indicate that many white people are nervous when they see images of African-American men. They get suspicious of their intent because of the racism that we've got built into our society. So a woman, Rosa Parks, is chosen, who has no criminal record whatsoever, because many white Americans would want to say, this is a troublemaker who's always gotten into criminal trouble, so no criminal record whatsoever. And this is her protest. She sits down in the front section of the bus. She is required to move to the back of the bus. And what Martin Luther King is going to embrace is something called civil disobedience. It's an idea that was encouraged by Henry David Thoreau. It was an idea that was stolen from Jesus way back when. And the idea is that if there is an immoral law, not only is it okay to break that law, it is your duty as a citizen to break an immoral law, because if a society has immoral laws, it is unjust. So what's going to be happening is she is going to break the law. She's going to accept the consequence for it. And then Martin Luther King is going to stage the Montgomery bus boycott. And this is going to lead us towards the new civil rights movement's behavior of engaging in nonviolent protests and using television and the media to show the country how bad the situation is with racism inside the United States. When you're working today, then, you will find on my Google form, and I apologize because I'm not seamless with this, but hopefully I'm getting better. If you go back to your Google document, then what you will find inside of your Google document is your link for today's Ed Puzzle. If you go to that Ed Puzzle, you will find this clip. It's a half-hour long and will help you to answer the questions that you've got for question 2 and question 4 for your text questions. It's going to show you Martin Luther King and his Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And it's also going to show you a group of young people your age and a little bit older who are going to make change. And they're going to be known as SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. What I'm especially excited about, though, is you're going to be meeting during the video today a politician named John Lewis, who is currently a representative from Georgia. You're going to see him when he's incredibly young, and kids your age are going to start engaging in nonviolent civil disobedient protests so that they're able to try to affect change. And they want change more rapidly than what the NAACP is pursuing. They're going to do things that are confrontational. And for many white Americans, they're going to argue that African Americans are troublemakers because they're being disruptive. But what many civil rights leaders will recognize is if they're not disruptive, the status quo will never change. So that's what I'm going to want you to work on for today. Remember, when you're working with an ed puzzle, I want you to go through the activity. There will be a couple questions that I'm going to want you to type your responses to. I am also going to want you to finish the video all the way to completion, so let it go all the way to the end. It will end abruptly because I'll be sharing the third portion of the video with you tomorrow. And any questions or problems that you guys have, feel free to share them with me so that I can help you out. I'm going to check the chat right now, so I'm going to see if there's anything that I've missed out on. And I'm not seeing any questions posted yet. So at this point, you now know what you're up to for today. Make sure that you are letting me know if you have any sorts of questions or problems. What you should understand, though, is there are many people inside of our country who, when you watch the snippets that you're watching today and tomorrow, they're going to argue that we should just be done worrying about racism, discrimination, and whatever. They'll argue that our civil rights issues were fixed in the 1960s. And instead, what we want to be able to use is we want to be able to use these two terms. What Martin Luther King and the NAACP is working to get rid of is what's called de jure segregation. It's segregation by law. So right now and in the 1960s, you're going to see Martin Luther King, JFK, Lyndon Johnson get rid of the laws that require us to be discriminatory and racist. What many civil rights leaders will point out, though, is that the structures and society and the systems that we've got in place, these were all created from the 1600s forwards, and for the majority of that time, we were built on either slavery or sharecropping and discrimination. So even though it's been nice that for the past 50 years, we got rid of the laws that required discrimination, we still have a lot of systems that are in place like that, and we still have a lot of people who were brought up by people who were thinking in that sort of way. And so we're going to find that while laws are passed that will make things better, there are still issues that we're wrestling with nowadays. And that's what we'll be looking at then next week as we finish up with this video series. So again, today, chapter 25, lesson 2. Email if you've got any questions. We'll get back together tomorrow for a debrief at 10 a.m. and then I'll turn you loose with the rest of chapter 25. You'll be submitting over the weekend, and then we'll be doing some activities to kind of wrap up where are we sitting with civil rights currently. I miss you guys a ton. Hopefully you guys are doing okay with your isolation. It sounds like the weather is going to get a little better tomorrow, today, and then quite a bit better tomorrow. And so hopefully a little bit of sunshine will help to improve my mood. And if you're feeling the same way, I'm hoping you feel the same too. But reach out if you need anything. I miss you guys, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye, guys.